All right. So, welcome to week 2 of JavaScript AppScript 101. We are live from North Central Room at New Visions for Public Schools. Going to ask people to go on to the Slack channel, which I'm going to show right now. Get into the syllabus. I linked everybody to the syllabus. People probably just joining. So in the Slack channel, I've linked folks to the syllabus. So people can bring that up. We'll get started with our objectives. Give people a few minutes to get going, and I'm just going to post the Slack channel up. So go from there. I have with me Jared Carano, who's our JavaScript AppScript extraordinaire.
Hey guys.
Looks like we have a number of viewers, so exciting. Yeah. Why don't you narrate that?
Okay. Hey guys, so for this week's exercise and demo, it probably will be useful for you all to create a spreadsheet of your own. There in the syllabus, there is under session 2, it says do now create a spreadsheet in week 2 class resources folder. So if you click that, it should take you to your folder in Drive and just create a blank spreadsheet in there and just name it with your name and maybe like week 2 in it. And you'll be able to follow along if you want to in there. And then later we're gonna have an exercise, and you're gonna use the script editor in that spreadsheet to complete the assignment. So give folks a couple minutes to do that. I'm also gonna start sharing my screen so you can kind of follow along on what I'm doing as well. Looks like Eric's sharing his screen.
Yeah, so it looks like a bunch of folks are.
You're on mute.
So it looks like a bunch of folks are in the syllabus. Going to create spreadsheets in the appointed folder. I'm going to do that myself, so I'll demo that.
Okay, so while you guys are finishing that, this week, what we're going to do is we're going to review some of the things you went over in the Unit 3 of Code Academy. You should have did that for homework. And possibly get into a few new concepts that you will get into in Code Academy, but maybe haven't gotten to yet. And that's mostly just because they're pretty important, and it's kind of hard to do an exercise without some of these concepts. But to start, we're gonna just go over like what arrays are, what objects are, and mostly we're gonna be focused on like this concept of looping, which is really important. A pretty important kind of any code you write, you're pretty much going to need to write a loop, which is just a process for like iterating through data. So let me see. Looking in the folder, it looks like most people have created their spreadsheet by now. Okay. So I'm going to pull up my spreadsheet. So I think we talked about this last week, but the way we're going to go into the AppScript script editor, and that's where we're going to be doing all of our coding. So let me zoom in a little. So you'll notice in Google Spreadsheets, in Forms and Google Docs, there's typically this tools menu, and in there is an item called script editor. So if you click on that, if you don't have a project yet, it will create a blank one that does not have a name. So click on that, go in here and give it a name. I'm going to say to demo, click OK. Okay, it takes a second, and then you see that it has the name there. It starts you off with a function called myFunction. So to start off, I just wanted to do a recap of like some of the main data structures in JavaScript. The first one is called an object. So in my function, I'm going to create, should just kind of show you what an object looks like. I'm going to create I'm going to declare a new object called myObj. So this right here, at this point, var myObj, that's called a declaration. As soon as I set it equal to something, I've initialized it. And then I'm going to put in the word debugger. And that was another thing we talked about, we demoed last week. So right now you'll see in this dropdown, my function is selected by default. It's the only function we have. And then you have this little bug icon here. And if I click that, it's going to start debugging, which is basically a way to get a window into your code. And we'll just like take a look at what we have right now. And the debugger is super helpful. You can kind of live in my debugger when I'm coding. Okay, so all we see right now is there's this thing called this, which we will get into maybe way towards the end of this course. You don't have to worry about it. Arguments is kind of comes with every function. This in arguments comes with every function. And then here's myObj, what we declared, and it basically has nothing in it. It's just an empty array. So we just created an empty object. Objects have properties on them. And the syntax for an object is like this. My prop1 equals some string. So that's right. So it's basically like a camel-cased key, a colon, and then a value. In this case, a string, because I wrapped it in quotes. You'll notice that quotes can be single or double space. It doesn't really matter. And then if you have, we could just stop here, and I'm going to save it and hit the debugger. And now you'll see there's a little plus sign next to myObj. And if I open it, it expands, and you see my prop1. It's a type of string, and it has the value of some string, right? So if I want to add another key, I have to put a comma after the last, the first property, and I'm going to say my other prop. And this one is going to be a number. Debugger. Right, and now we see two properties, my prop, my other prop. The second one is a number, and it has the value here. So something to, okay, so let's see, instead of calling, okay, myObj, let's now show you an array. So var my array equals this. So we use the square brackets, open and close square brackets to denote an array. Hit the debugger. And okay, so now same thing, we see an array, it's empty. I'm going to just start putting values into that array. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now we see, right, we have myObj, we have my array. Now I can expand my array. 1, 2, 3, 4. Something really important to remember is that in JavaScript, arrays are 0 indexed, which means the first position in an array is 0. So you'll see number 1 is at position 0, 2 is at position 1, etc. And that's going to be important when we get into looping. So just kind of keep that in mind. And in JavaScript, the whole point of an array, like part of its definition is it's this sort of indexed, it's like this group of indexed items. The index is how you can tell your processor like at what point in the array to go and look for a piece of data. Okay, so what we showed right now was just
Can you zoom in a bit?
Like
in your code editor.
Yes. Better?
Community will tell us.
Okay. Okay. So right in these two examples, we have basically numbers and strings as values, but these values could be sort of anything that's valid in JavaScript generally. So it could be a date. It could be I don't know what else, a Boolean, which is true or false. But then what's really interesting is it could be another array or an object, right? So going to this array, my object, I'm going to say my nested object, and this is itself going to be an object. My nested prop was some nested string. Right. So, okay, and you can probably see that something funny happened with my AppScript editor. This just started happening a few months ago, and I have no idea why, but you'll notice like my little bug disappeared. All of the symbols disappeared, and it turned into these kind of like just these little smudgy lines. I don't know how to, there's nothing you can really do about that. If you want to remember what the buttons say, I just hover for a second to be able to find it. So there's my bug debugger. So I'm going to click that. Okay, and now I'm going to expand my obj, and you'll see my nested obj is in here, and that also can be expanded, and then my nested prop, right? Some nested string. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions on that. I'm going to keep moving unless Eric tells me there's a question.
Jared, can you just maybe zoom out a little bit? Actually, just a little bit more. Wait, so you can see the whole. Yeah, so you can see a little bit more of the whole. And just pause there for maybe let's give people like 30 seconds on this. And so maybe we can take some questions about these concepts. All right, well, unmute yourself.
Fine.
So maybe we can go into the syllabus and just review some of the things we've outlined in the syllabus for today. Maybe give a broad overview of the goal for today's course.
Sure.
So the goal for today's course is to be able to get to a Google spreadsheet that has a list of schools, and then extract the list that based on a certain criteria, and we're going to have a point person or a person column. So the idea is that you'll be able to take a list, take a subset of that list, and write that list to a different spreadsheet. So that's the goal by the end of today's session. We should all be able to do that, and it's going to demonstrate some of the concepts that we've seen in Code Academy. So we're going to have that goal by the end of the course, at the end of the session today. So we reviewed some concepts just now as people got into the course of arrays, objects, and we haven't really gotten into loops yet, but we're going to. and we've also seen how the debugger works. And we're also going to look at how we use an if statement, which is going to come in handy when we, towards the latter end of the session, when we want to write a subset of the list to a Google spreadsheet that we have all created. So Menica says that, what's a use case for a nested property? Are we going to get to that?
Yeah, great.
I think we'll demonstrate that.
Yeah, we will demonstrate that shortly. And thank you, Eric, for giving us the big picture. I kind of just jumped right into my first part of this, but that was really helpful. Yeah, the point is we want to make this course. I went through the Code Academy course a while ago, and I'm not doing it now, so forgive me if I don't know exactly what was taught in which week, but I remember going through and it's a little bit like abstract, and it became, a lot of these things really clicked once I started using AppScript, because it's a way to immediately start kind of using them in ways that I could apply like to help me at work immediately. So hopefully you guys see that today. So the hope was, the reason why we're going to maybe jump ahead a little bit from what you've learned in AppScript is because there's just a few kind of, things you can't get, you can't really write a script without knowing. But if you learn those today, we can leave today with you having the ability to kind of programmatically go into a spreadsheet, open it, get some data out, filter it, and write it to another spreadsheet. And I think that would be pretty cool. So, okay, so this idea of nested looping. So when I was saying that, like in an object or in an array, a value could be sort of any legal JavaScript value. That includes other objects and other arrays, right? Like I demonstrated that with the nested object. What you're going to see, which is, it took me a little while to get my head around, but when we start, when I show you, when we start diving into AppScript and working with spreadsheet data, the way a spreadsheet is represented in JavaScript is as basically an array of arrays. So you have one array that is kind of all of your data, and inside that is an array representing each row, and each value in that, or in each value in those nested arrays is represents a cell or a column in that row. So just keep that in mind, but we'll come back to that. I just also want to show just like this idea of why it's useful to, what's powerful about setting things equal to variables. So down here in my array, right, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all numbers. There's nothing saying that all of the value types in an array have to be the same. So I'm going to just put my obj right here and just show you that in the debugger. Right, so now we have, if I expand my array, you'll see we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the 5th item at position 4 is an object that, if I expand it, you'll notice it's exactly my object, my obj from above. So just something to keep in mind how that all kind of applies. Okay, where's stop? That one. Okay, so I want to demonstrate that. Let's build something that might look a little bit like student data. So let's see. Let's demonstrate looping, actually. I'm going to create a new function called run loop. This is, what did I say in this syllabus? Okay. Yeah, run loop. And then I'm going to create a variable that I will call data. And inside data, I will put 1. I'll say student ID, student first, and student last. Okay, so show that in a debugger. So when I'm coding, I'm constantly just moving my debugger down. Oh, so I just called my function. That's why it went to this debugger at the top. I have to change the function here back down to run loop, which will show up if once you write a new function in, after you save it, it should be available from this drop-down list. Okay, so now run loop, hit the debugger. And you'll see our variable data is right here. Expand it, student ID, student first, student last. Okay. So typically, right, you get some sort of data, and you want to kind of iterate through all of the pieces of data and then do some action on each piece of that data. So the way you do that is through a loop. Today we're really going to focus on this loop that has the structure for, it looks like it's a little funny, but for var, it's basically, I think you can call it an I loop sometimes, but let's see. Okay, for var I, you're basically declaring I right here equals 0. You're just telling your loop at what position to start. You're giving the loop, yeah, you're initializing I at 0, and then you're going to say I is less than data.length. So you guys should probably learn that already, but you can get the length of an array just by putting .length, and that will return, in this case, it should return 3. And then I++. And I++ is just shorthand for, I++ is basically the same thing as saying I equals I plus 1. That's basically the same exact thing.
Or as I think we also saw in the course, it's I plus equals 1.
Yeah, so it's kind of these like nested or these layers of simplifying. So you could say var I equals 0, I plus equals 1 is saying take I, add it to, take I and add 1 to itself. And then I think that's the same as I plus I equals I plus 1. And I think if we put a debugger here, well, let's put a debugger here. Okay, so at this point, I equals 1. And so if I click the debugger again, what I think is going to happen, so I should be equal to, I will equal I, which is 1 plus 1. So at this debugger, I think it'll equal 2. Yeah. And so if I take this out, say I plus plus, I'm pretty sure at the debugger, let's see, I'll get rid of this debugger. Stop and rerun the debugger. I'm pretty sure it'll still be 2. Yeah, so, right, so those are all essentially exactly the same. I'm also going to say var length up here equals data.length, and just show you how you don't have to put the length in here. You could also say length like this. Over here. Okay, right, so you see the new variable I added, length, is equal to 3, which makes sense because we have 1, 2, 3 items in our array. So we're basically saying I equals 0, run through this loop until I equals 3, and each time you finish, add 1 to I. So this works when less than I equals length is because, again, this is where that 0 index becomes useful, right? So the first time through I, well, let's just look at it in the debugger. Hit the debugger. Okay. Right, so I'm in my debugger inside my loop, and you could see this is the first time through the loop. I here is equal to 0. If I click continue debugging, I equals 1. Continue debugging, I equals 2. And then continue debugging, whoops. And it ends, right? Because it's not going to stop. It's not going to get inside here again, because at that point, I equals 3, and we've already told it, only do this when I is less than 3. Okay. So I've been using the debugger, but I wanted to return to something else we showed last week, which is the logger. And instead of debugger, I'm going to say logger.log, and I'm just going to log I. And instead of running the debugger, I am going to click the run. It should be a triangle and like a play button, unless you have these little faded smudgy lines like I do. So I'm going to click run. Right, that ran. And now if I go to view and logs, you'll see that the logger logged the value of I 3 times, which was 0, 1, and 2. Okay. Sounds like given the silence on Slack, everyone is just right there with me. Okay, so why is this useful? Why is I useful? Why do we care about I? It's because it's the way you access items inside of an array. So let's step back and let's go above our loop, and let's say our test equals data. And now at this point, test is just going to equal my entire array. But if I wanted it to equal just one of the values in the array, I would have to tell it which position I'm interested in.
Wait, hold on. Let's see if the Slack community can tell us what, if you wanted to access, in Jared's example, student first, how would he get to that? What would be the syntax if they could put that in line 21? If you're going to complete line 21, how would we get to the student first? So if somebody could, in the Slack community, but how would you get to student first? Just going to wait for somebody to come in with the answer. Line 21. How would we get to that? All right. Let's see if Dimitri, who chimed in with the first answer, got it correct.
Where is it?
It's var test equals data.
Oh, I see.
Let's see what happens.
Okay, so open bracket, the number 1, close bracket. I'm going to put a debugger. Whoops. And so I have to zoom out to be able to access my debugger, but let's see. Test equals student first, so that's it. All right, and so hopefully everyone gets why that's the case, right? We're saying return the value in data at position 1, which since we're 0 indexed, this is position 0. This is position 1. This is position 2, right? So that worked because we knew, right? We could see student first, and we know it's at position 1 just from looking at it. But often you're not going to know in advance what position something's at. So that's kind of the entirety of the point of the I loop. So what we could do is inside here, instead of logging I am going to log data I. Just like up above we had, maybe I should put that back, var test equals data 1. Okay, and this equaled student first. Down here we're going to log, inside the loop, we're going to log the value of data at position I for each iteration. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to go to view, logs, right? And we could see student ID, student first, student last. We're all logged, right? Great. Okay. So now, what if we didn't want to log all 3 of those? What if we knew we were interested in, for whatever reason, logging the value student first, but we didn't want to log anything else? That's where the if statement comes in handy. And I think you guys have seen this already, but we'll just go over it again, right? It's if an open paren and then your conditional. So I'm going to say if data I equals 3 equal signs, really important. I'll come back to that in a second. Student first. And then, and then I would open a parenthesis and close a parenthesis. And then I'm just going to move this logger into there. Clean this up a little bit. Okay. So now, okay, what I think we're doing, we'll see if I did it correctly, but we're saying loop through all of the elements in this array, but only log it if the value that we're on in this current iteration is equal to student first. So I'm going to go view, logs, right? And all we see is student first. Great, so that worked as expected. Okay. So now I just want to show, okay, so we have a pretty simple array here. Let me show you, let's make the array itself a little bit more complicated. I'm basically going to nest this array. So all I'm going to do to start is add a bracket in the beginning and another bracket at the end. And then just to like clean it up to make it a little easier to read, I'm going to hit enter and tab it in and then hit enter and tab that back. Okay, right? So now we're basically saying data is equal to an array. And at position 0 in that array is another array, which is our former array. So now let me actually move all this. So in case you guys want to look at the code we had before, you can do that. So I'm going to call this run simple loop. And I'm going to create a new function called run nested loop. So empty function, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to basically just copy, I'll just copy this for now. I'm going to copy the data. I'm going to do what I did last time. I'm going to open the bracket, hit enter, tab it in, close the bracket, and then just put it in the debugger. So we can do that. I'm going to save it. Now you'll see we have run simple loop and run nested loop in our drop-down menu. I'm going to click run nested loop, and I'm going to click debug. Okay, right? So here's data. If I expand it, there's one thing inside of data at position 0. You can ignore this 4. They added this recently to the debugger, and to be honest, I don't know what it means. And if I expand that at position 0, it has our array of length 3, student ID, student first, student last, right? So let's add a few more arrays to this array. So I'm going to add a comma, add another array, and this one is going to have, this is just a fake student ID, and student name of Jared, student last of Corano, and let's add one more. Okay, and let's just see what that looks like in the debugger. Okay, so expanding data, now we see we have 3 items inside our array representing 3 other arrays. And then each of those I can expand, right? Each one of those is itself a length of 3 from 0 to index 0 to index 2. Okay, so this is what this is basically what we'll see in a little bit. This is what a spreadsheet looks like when you get all of the values in it. So imagine data is basically like a sheet in your spreadsheet, and you open it up. 0 is row 1, which has your headers. There's basically 3 columns in the spreadsheet. Row 2 is at position 1, and that's your first student. And row 3 is at position 2, and that's your second student. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, let's give people a chance to digest that.
And I'm going to post all this code. I'm sure you guys are copying along, but you'll have this exact. You'll be able to look at this specifically too later if you want.
So Medica asks, is there any greater value add for the logger as opposed to the debugger?
The logger, you can kind of sprinkle loggers throughout your code to just kind of leave like a little breadcrumb trail of information for you that might be helpful in debugging. Like the debugger is a little bit slower, but I find it's more it's often more useful because you can go in there and you can expand an object and really like get in and inspect what it looks like, or an array. But you can imagine logging little status messages, you know.
Say, is the logger useful for anything other than coding?
Oh no, it's just it's basically a developer tool to help you as a developer. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last thing I want to show before we get into, I guess there's a few things. This is probably the most complicated concept we'll get into today, but it's just this idea of nested looping. Eric, was that part of the course, the part of your Code Academy lesson or no?
I don't think we got into loops inside loops this week.
So,
but we should.
Okay. So I'm just going to rewrite the same loop we had up above. So var I equals 0. For var I equals 0, I is less than data dot length I plus plus. And in here, I'm going to declare a new variable and say var, let's say var row equals data I. Debugger. This is pretty much the same as what we were doing before. The only difference is that the value at data I is now itself a simple array, right? Before it was just one of these values. Now it is an array with the three values representing a row in our made up spreadsheet. So now what if you wanted to iterate through all the values in row 1? So that's where we would basically need another loop inside of this loop. And so basically just the same exact thing, but we just need to give our var a different letter, because if we use I again, it's going to overwrite the I that we want to keep track of in our outer loop and mess everything up. So a typical syntax you'll see is to use J for your first level down in a loop. Our J equals 0. J is less than row.length. J plus plus. And I'm going to say var cell equals row J. Another debugger. Okay. Right, so at this first debugger on line 44, the first time it stops, I is equal to 0, and J is equal to 0. And so the value where I equals 0 and J equals 0 is student ID, right? And that makes sense. That's our first, kind of the first value that we come across. So if I click next, if I click continue debugging, right? So I is still 0, but J is now 1, right? Because we're in this inner loop. So this is going to run all the way through for each iteration of I. So now cell equals student first, continue debugging, equals student last. And now J is going to equal 3, which should make it bump I. It will break out of this inner loop, because when row.length is less than 3, it's going to break. So click it one more time and see it jumps down to our debugger down here. And then I'll just do this one more time just to make the point. Continue debugging, right? And now I is equal to 1, and J is reset back to 0. And now we're in now the value is 1111, which is, right, the student ID for the student in row 1. Sorry, row 2. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Definitely ask questions if you have questions right now. I'll leave those debuggers.
Could you just like pause it for 30 seconds right there on the run nested loop? Yeah.
So just on the same concept, not adding anything new, but like, right, at this point, I equals 0, sorry, I equals 1 and J equals 0, and then at that point, cell equals 111. Right, I just split this out to make it really visible. Like I created a new variable named row and set it to data I, created a new variable named cell and set it to row J. I put a test in here. I can make test equal to data I, J, and this should be equivalent. So let me just run that. right? So I just put a comment in here using this double backslash. Okay. We good?
Yep. Looks like Wayne asked the question and you gave him the answer. Wayne, you good on that? Wayne asked, can we also access it by using data IJ? So
Perfect. Yes. Okay. So I just want to quickly. I just want to show this idea of like calling a function from another function. So we have this function run nested loop, but let's just say we wanted. I'm just going to let's see. What's nice about JavaScript, about probably any coding language, is like you can write these little snippets of code that are like highly reusable. Like this is really specific right now. The only thing it's ever gonna loop through is data that we've kind of hard coded into here. But let's try to make that a little bit more dynamic. So I'm going to create another function that's just going to be called, instead of run nested loop, it's going to be called call run nested loop. Let's move our data out of this function. Put it in here. Now, so right, you see this stop is no longer blue. That's because it's saying there is no data declared in this scope. But that's what, between these little parens where you declare your function, you can pass variables in. So I'm going to put the word data there. That's just saying whatever comes in the first position of this function, if anything comes in, set it equal to the variable data. So now in this function call run nested loop, I'm going to say var results equals run nested loop. I'm going to pass in data. I'm going to put it right here. And to illustrate a point, I'm going to run this. Oh. Run this. What did I do? Oh, because I didn't change this. Call run nested loop. So I was just saying to run this, which it ran, but it threw an error because data was undefined, which makes sense. I'm also going to comment out these debuggers so we don't get stuck on them. Okay. Right, result is undefined. And I just wanted to make that point that is because in order for us to see anything, we have to return something from this run nested loop, which is what we this is a bad example. We're not returning anything. I'm just gonna call it, put my debuggers back on, just to show that the point is, right, if I'm now calling call run nested loop, it's still gonna work exactly the same as it did before, right? So we're still in our debugger and test equals student ID, okay? Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. This code is going to be here for you to look at later if you didn't copy it all. But I just want to move on because we have 12 minutes, and I want to just, we might not get through the whole assignment here.
you could also run a little bit over.
Yeah, I'm happy to run over. I don't know about, if people don't have time, obviously you can come back and watch the rest of the video, and then we'll have office hours and stuff too. Okay, but those were important concepts to kind of reiterate. Okay, going back to our syllabus. Oh yeah. So I already showed this. Oh, one quick thing is just this idea of array.push. That's something I don't think you got to yet in your course, right? But let's see. That's just a method that is on an array that allows you to add things into it. So let's say, I'm just going to try to do this quickly, but our new array is an empty array. And inside here, I'm going to say new array.push. And I'm just going to push cell. And I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to comment on this just so we could see. So at this point, at this debugger here, we should be after both of those loops ran. Right? And so now new array is above row because it was declared above row. So new array is declared here, and then row is here. But anyway, new array, if I expand it, it's just a flattened array of all of the values, which makes sense. Right? Inside J, whatever the value is cell is, just push it into this new array. So does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. But we're going to need that for the assignment. And this could be homework too. Okay, so I just want to talk about so the piece that's totally different than the Code Academy, the stuff you're going to learn on Code Academy is all the stuff related specifically to AppScript. And so basically Google has all of these APIs, right? They have hundreds of APIs that let you interact with their services. Some of those APIs, they have basically made these helpful little wrappers around that make them really easy to get to from AppScript. So so there's 4 that we're going to be talking about a lot during this course. Drive app, document app, mail app, spreadsheet app. These are basically wrappers around the Drive API, the Google Documents API, the Gmail API, and the Google Spreadsheets API. So when you call an API from a normal developing environment, you have to do all of this stuff around authentication, where if you say, go get me this spreadsheet with this spreadsheet ID, you have to prove that you have editing access to that spreadsheet. And that stuff's all a little bit complicated in most development environments. When you're in Google AppScript, it knows who you are. So let me just show a really quick example. Who am I? So in addition to those these services, there's this one called session. And so in here, and you basically type out the name of the service and then hit a dot, and it'll show you all of these what's called a method, which is basically just a function, but the function is tied to that service. So I'm going to say get active user, get email. Don't worry if the syntax looks a little funny. Or I am I'm going to have to authorize because that's a new service that we haven't used yet. It wants to know who I am. Right? So I am, and it knows my email address. So that just means you don't have to do all of this authorization stuff. It already knows who you are, so it can simplify a lot of that for you, and it just gives you all of these methods. Basically makes working with their APIs much, much, much easier. So that's a really high level. Let's see. Yeah, so these services, Google calls them services. It's essentially what in most programming languages might be referred to as a class. And a class is basically a collection of methods and properties, and that's just another way of saying functions and properties. So don't get too hung up on like the terminology, but it's just this idea that like a class or a service is kind of like a bucket of related functionality. So the spreadsheet class has all of the functions that let you interact with a spreadsheet. So the things we're going to want to look at right now are right, and you can also have subclasses. So the spreadsheet class has a subclass of a range and a subclass of a sheet. And those are child, I guess you could say child classes. So we just wrote out in this table what all of the classes are, and the specific methods and which class they belong to are for this assignment. So these are just the methods we're going to use. Get active lets you get the spreadsheet that you're in. So in the case of this, because I'm in an app script editor that is attached to this spreadsheet is the active spreadsheet. So get active will allow me to kind of like load that spreadsheet into a variable. Open by ID lets you get a different spreadsheet that you're not currently in by the document ID. So if you're in a different script editor, you could get this spreadsheet by grabbing this spreadsheet ID. There's a method get sheet by name where you give it a string of a name of a tab in a spreadsheet. So right, like if we gave sheet 1, it would let you get this specific sheet. It's how you tell AppScript which sheet you want to work with. Right, and then you can get a range by telling it which row and which columns to look at. It can tell you what the last row is in a spreadsheet, the last column. These are all things we use like over and over again, and you'll see why in this exercise. And then get values, right? So all of those things, you put all of those things together, and you could basically get the values out of a sheet in a spreadsheet. And then all of the get methods basically have most of the get methods have kind of a sibling method called set, which lets you kind of do the opposite. So set values would let you write values to a sheet, get values to get them out of it. Okay, let's try to demo some of this in the script editor. So let's say function spreadsheet app demo. And I'm going to go pretty quick just in the name of time, but like this code will all be here, and feel free to ask questions, and we're going to stay long too. But right, let's create a variable called SS for spreadsheet, and we're going to say it equals spreadsheet app. And once I write spreadsheet app and I hit dot, this is basically showing me all of the methods that are available on spreadsheet app. So, you know, this is sometimes I don't even go to the documentation, which I would get to by just typing app script spreadsheet app. I think Eric linked to it as well, but see class spreadsheet, and I'd come in here, and this is how I kind of learn about what all this stuff does and how you use it. So this is definitely your friend to figure this stuff out. But often I don't even need to do that because I just hit the dot and then it tells me all of the methods, and you can kind of just intuit what you can do. But anyway, get active. So now SS is the active spreadsheet that we're on. Var sheet equals, and this I can type SS and dot, and you'll see I get another menu. That's because when you say spreadsheet get active, it basically returns, right? It returns a spreadsheet class, which has methods on it. So SS dot get sheet by name, sheet 1, and let's just look in the debugger. I have to authorize because we've added spreadsheet service, which we weren't using before. Okay, so now you'll see in the debugger, SS is an object and sheet is an object. The difference is there's no values. You can't expand these. That's just because they're like these AppScript special AppScript objects where everything is essentially like hidden. But that's fine. You can just see that it worked because these are now equal to these objects. So
I think we had a question. What is an API?
An API is,
Or just could you just talk about it in the context of this? What you just did.
yeah. So like there's different types of APIs, but and I don't even remember what API stands for, to be honest. But the most popular, pretty much like the really popular APIs these days are called RESTful APIs, and that's another acronym that I don't know. But the point is that like they're all they're basically these requests that you can make over HTTP. So in a web browser, you can basically call a web address and something will happen, like you pass parameters in through that web address, and then the API is basically like a company, Google has a server set up that is listening for people that access that web address. And when they do, they evaluate the parameters that are passed in, and then they give some response. So, right when you log into Google, you're authenticating yourself through their API, and then it knows who you are, and it's going to fetch all of the email that's like in your inbox and like show it to you. I don't know if that was a good explanation, but that's like most APIs work through HTTP. And it's basically just a URL. And this just like kind of simplifies a lot of that for you. So instead of having to build a URL and create an authorization token, which is like a complicated kind of thing to do, Google already knows who you are, so it just lets you access their API. They basically just wrote, I don't know how to explain it really well, but they just wrote a bunch of helper functions.
Yeah, we're getting some chatter on the Slack channel, so why don't we push forward?
Okay. Okay, so I used getActive that got this specific, let's see, let me just put in some values. So value in cell A1, value in cell B1, value in cell A2, and value in cell B2. Okay. So I'm going to make a new variable, call it range. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to say var last row equals sheet dot get last row. I'm going to say var last column equals sheet dot last get last column. And then I'm going to say var range equals sheet get range. And right, you can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different versions of get range. That's actually just the same method showing you all of the different parameters you could pass in or not pass in. So so I'm going to pick this third one. This is the one we use like all the time. We use this exact same pattern. Right, what it wants is basically the starting row, the starting column, and then the number of rows and the number of columns. So I'm going to say the starting row is row 1, and the starting column is column 1. And then the number of rows is going to be last row. Number of columns is going to be last. I could have just typed in 2 and 2, 2 and 2, but this is more dynamic, right? If maybe you don't know ahead of time how many rows and how many columns, so that's the way you get around that. And then say var data equals range dot get values, and if I did everything right, should see those values. Okay, so we have data. If I open it, at row 0, I open that, right? We have value in cell A1, value in cell B1, and in row 2, value in cell A2, and value in cell B2, right? So this looks just like the made-up array we did above. Now, let's say we want to, let's add, I'm going to go into this sheet, and I'm going to add a new sheet. I don't know why I can't see it. Okay. Okay, so I just want to show how you would write that data to another sheet. So I'm now down here, I'm going to say var sheet 2 equals ss.get sheet by name sheet 2. That's added. Var destination range equals sheet 2.get range. Right, and here we want to do the same thing, row 1, column 1, but instead of num rows, in this case, let's say we don't know what the number of rows are. We could say data.length plus 1. Remember, because it's 0, I think we could just do data.length. And num columns would be data 0.length. So that might be a little confusing to you guys, but if you think about it, I think you could figure out why. I'm basically just using the shape of the data to intuit how many rows and how many columns there are. And now I'm going to say destination range dot set values data. And let's see if that works. Okay, so there was no error. I'm going to just continue debugging. And now go into my spreadsheet and open sheet 2. And you see there's the same values, right? So I just got this values from here and wrote them here. So the only thing I didn't show you, and then I think, unless Eric, you have a different idea, I think what we were intending to go through in class could really just be a homework. And it's kind of just putting together everything we just looked at. The idea was to get the values from this spreadsheet, filter it for your name. So first come in here and put your name next to I don't think all the schools are in here, so just put your name next to a handful of schools. You're going to want to iterate through that data, push the data to a new array, and then write that array back to your sheet. That is the assignment. The only thing you don't have here that can help you do that, which I can get you started, function your assignment starter. Is in this, instead of using spreadsheet app.getActive, we're going to do open by ID. And it wants a string. I'm going to just click into this spreadsheet and grab this spreadsheet ID and put it in here. Just show you quickly. Your assignment starter. I'm going to hit the debugger. Right, it doesn't show you anything super interesting because remember it's an object that you can't really explore. But the point is, it didn't throw an error. It was able to open the spreadsheet and it turned it into a valid object. So basically, you should have everything in this code here to do the assignment. Sorry, we ended up going a little quick and going over, but hopefully that all makes sense to everybody.
So we'll take the last 5 minutes for questions about the assignment. And we'll just throw up the Slack channel. You know what? I first read that and I was like, "Who's S Lackbot?" And then I was like, "That's obnoxious."
That's funny.
So a few people are typing, so we'll let them.
Sure. I think Menik is asking if
Oh, do you want us to synthesize it? Okay. So the assignment. Chanel, no, it doesn't matter which schools. You can add schools also to the list if you want. So the assignment is, and I'll just verbalize it and I'll type it in Slack in a little bit. The assignment is to go use the code identified in the syllabus, and I'll just point to it in the syllabus, or actually in the Drive folder. So there's a Drive folder with Jared's Week 2 spreadsheet. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to go into the script editor. And there's a bunch of example code from today. But we want to go into the school list for JS 101 spreadsheet. We're going to put our name or any criteria in the person column. So you can add your schools if they're not represented here. Again, this is all publicly available data. Which schools New Visions works with is on our website. So make sure that the data that you put in here is not sensitive at all. Put in your name or any name that you want to be able to filter on. The idea is that you, using the method under the spreadsheet app class, to get the spreadsheet app by OpenID, use that to grab the object, which is going to be a series of arrays, an array of arrays, which is demonstrated in lines 33 through 37. in the code editor, but as we can see, it's represented the same way in the debugger when we grab the 2x2 array as demonstrated in the get range row 74. Sorry, line 74. Actually, row 74 and 75 to get the values of the range. Then what we're doing is perhaps by using a loop, an if statement, a nested loop to filter on the arrays that we want within the array that is going to be from the school list for JS 101, and then we're going to write that array using some of the methods described between rows 69 and 81. We don't want to give away the answer. I want there to be some challenge into our own spreadsheet. So that is the summary of the activity for today. So Menika, does that meet your criteria for being clear in terms of what we're asking folks to do? Hopefully it was. So that's the homework. We went over by 16 minutes, but thanks for sticking along and sticking with us. I think today seemed like it was applicable to me more so than the first class, and hopefully you all felt maybe the same way, got into accessing sheets, which we didn't really get to in the first class. So so we're gonna thank you for joining. We'll sign off. And until next week, 4 to 5 on Wednesdays.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.